frenemies, adultery, suburban life, marriage, and motherhood, just to name a few themes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
I also want to let everyone know that we're giving away a copy of Between the Tides on BookTrib.com, so please enter to win after the chat. Very exciting stuff. So before we begin our questions, can you tell us a bit more about Between the Tides?
Well, Between the Tides is a commercial novel written mostly for women. It's told in two voices, the voice of Lainie and the voice of Jess. And they knew each other back in the day in Cape May, New Jersey, and they rediscover one another. They're very different types. Lainie is dreamy, she's an artist, and Jess is definitely the popular leader in town.
Okay, and when they get back together, some interesting things happen.
Yes, for certain. They take a very dark journey together that one cannot predict.
And for those who don't know, Susannah Marren, her real identity is Susan Shapiro-Barish, and she's an established writer of 13 nonfiction women's issue books. She's a well-recognized gender expert. She's frequently sought out by the media and blogs for the Huffington Post and Psychology Today. She's been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune. So we're kind of like introducing you as the real deal right now, which is exciting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's really heady stuff.
Yeah.
First of all, it's very, very cool to have a pseudonym.
Yeah.
To have a pen name. I think of Mark Twain and other famous writers who've done it. And for me, it was a very deliberate decision that my publisher for many years, St. Martin's, and I decided for a different genre to really differentiate with identity as well as the style of writing.
Have there been any advantages, disadvantages that you've seen since using this pen name?
Well, Susannah Marren is, to me, a really pretty name. One I actually told my mother I wanted when I was still in college. I was wanted to be called Susannah. But what's so, I think, riveting about writing a novel after writing nonfiction is that you're not sitting there with your books and your research and your stacks of interviews, because I would do interviews with women all across the country, different ages, social strata, ethnicity, just to hear how they felt about very emotional issues, about motherhood, about romance, about female rivalry, and what it is that we really seek for ourselves. So I took all that I researched and I really put it into this novel.
Excellent. And what made you, as a well-known gender expert and best-selling author of nonfiction books about all types of women's issues, decide to switch genres and become a novelist?
Well, I love both forms. I really do. I love journalism, I love narrative nonfiction, and I love fiction. And I've always wanted to write both. And when I earned my MFA, it was in fiction writing, but I'd also really been writing articles. So it kind of almost seemed, really it seemed natural. But as I said, to dream of Lainie and Jess, especially how rivalrous they really are, and how the stakes are raised when you're a wife and mother. Whereas when they were young women, it was all about the glittering prize as being the it girl on the beach and the beautiful one in the crowd. And now here they are all these years later, and it really is as intense as ever.
Absolutely. And so what issues did you write about and research for your nonfiction books, going back to those, and do any of those issues come into play in the novel to kind of tie those in?
Well, I started out my first nonfiction book in 1993, dating myself, was on female infidelity. And although it's very popular now, we see it on television series and we hear about it all the time, it was quite something to really investigate it then. To be a good wife, a good mother, and also to be having an affair. So infidelity, without giving away Between the Tides, is definitely one of the themes. And I'm very interested, as I said, in competition between women and among groups of women and why we do that. And then what is it like to mother a daughter versus a son? Why is that so different? And I've written a book on mothers and daughters for my nonfiction. It's fascinating.
Now, how has working as a nonfiction author differed from working as a novelist? What are some of the big differences that you've seen?
Well, you aren't researching per se. You really are alone with your computer screen and your imagination. Whereas for nonfiction, I always outline the book and annotate a table of contents. I take a look at the research early on before I even sell the book. as a book to be published before I make a book deal, and I really know what I need to learn. In this book, I felt maybe because I'm a nonfiction writer, I really had to outline it as well.
Absolutely.
And I'm not certain all novelists, from what I've heard, do it that way.
Yeah.
But I knew the end, and you know that people are saying it's a very surprising ending. People are really getting in touch now that the book has just come out, saying, wow, I never could have predicted that. But I knew the ending, and I think that really was my compass for how to tell the story.
I think people were shocked with the ending. I thought it was amazing.
Thank you.
Now, do you think you'd ever write another nonfiction book at this point? Would you go back to that, or are you going to kind of journey along in the fiction realm?
I'm under contract for another novel, and I'm writing it now, and I also would like to do another research project on
is this on a new women's issue that you've never covered, or
the new novel?
Yeah.
Well, in both Between the Tides and the novel that will come out next year, I'm very interested in place as almost a character in a book. So place really informs the story, and I'm doing that again.
How did Between the Tides inform? Like, how did where you grew up inform Between the Tides? Was there
a
big influence?
A really big influence, because I grew up on the Jersey Shore. Yeah. Not, as we know, the reality TV series, but I grew up on Long Beach Island, which is one of the few barrier islands in New Jersey. And this book takes place in 3 places. So it's New York, and it's a fictive town, a suburb I made up called Elliot, where Jess and Lainie reconnect. And then, of course, they knew each other back in the day in Cape May. And Cape May is just a beautiful place on the shore.
And the Silky Legend is something that I love. As a child, I swam a lot.
And you know it?
I have to tell you, but it's my mother's nickname for me. It's her little Silky, swear to God.
Oh, wow. Because I'm being, because I'm just starting my book tour, and I've been doing a lot of radio phoners, and some of the interviewers have said to me, we never heard of the Silky Legend. And then other people are writing to me on my website and saying, we looked up the Silky Legend. It's an incredible story.
It's such a good story. I used to watch, The Secret of Rowan Inish.
Right, The Secret of Rowan Inish.
And I feel like if you grew up Irish Catholic like I did, or, just like Irish American upbringing, you kind of know that sometimes. I don't know, it was like a big story that...
Or if we consider legends, and we think of the mermaid story as a myth or a legend, this one is just, it's darker and more, it's intriguing and less known.
So
that's sort of the background for this story.
Exactly.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to say is that although this is definitely the story of Jess and Lainie and the journey they take together, at the center of the story, although Lainie has 4 children and Jess has 2, is Mathilde, her 12-year-old daughter.
Can you go a little bit more into Mathilde?
Well, Mathilde is a character I really envisioned as feeling beholden to her mother, and that's very complicated for her. She and her mother are very similar, but her mother's an outsider. And so it really asks the question, what do we want for our daughters? And how do we help and how do we hinder as we raise them?
And the end is, open to interpretation, kind of, it's open-ended. So you knew that as you were writing it?
I did, and what's so curious to me is how emphatic readers are about the ending. Some, again, I can't give it away, a real surprise ending, but the question is, why did it happen and how did it happen? And it's really, you're right, left to the reader's interpretation.
I do like open-ended stories. Some people get really like, I need closure, but I think
this had to end this way.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, we have Lainie and Jess, and they have a long history of competition that's very convincing and realistic. Do you have any toxic friends?
Oh, I've been asked that because, I wrote a book called Toxic Friends. Well, first I want to defend Lainie and Jess a bit and say that they're not only toxic, that female friendships are so complicated and so nuanced that what we're seeing is where they help each other in the story, and where they absolutely betray one another, and how it's sort of a yin and yang. I don't have toxic friends because after I wrote the book, I decided to really weed them out.
Oh, wow.
But I think that friendship is very mixed for women. And when I was writing toxic friends on any given day, because I teach at Marymount Manhattan College, so I would take the bus down to the college. On Lexington, I take the limited bus up 3rd Avenue. I could eavesdrop and listen to women of all ages saying, "What would I do without my women friends?" Or, "Can you believe she did that to me?" And therein lies the rub. And that's definitely at the heart of this story.
Yeah, there's the two extremes. Do you think men are like that, or totally different?
I don't. I think that when we live and die in a patriarchal culture, despite the great gains for women, that men don't feel there's a limited goods theory. So if you get something, I think, although it's irrational that I can't get it, a job, a divorce, a baby, a new boyfriend, whatever it is that women think they get, that then you sitting next to your friend think, "Oops, she got there first." It's not like that. We have to stop thinking that way. And men have not had to think that way. So I think those are the differences.
So in the novel, there's many triangles. There's Lainie, Charles, Mathilde. There's Lainie, Jess, and Charles triangle, and Mathilde and Claire and Lainie. So what are you saying about the nature of threesomes?
Well, it's curious, since you mentioned my nonfiction. I had written a book a long time ago about mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law. And that triangle is so significant, right? You know, who does the husband/son protect, his mother or his wife? And when you think of friendship, certain threesomes don't work, even with adult women. And I think that we see it so often that threesomes are tricky and not balanced. So, there are triangles everywhere in this book.
Absolutely. And the voices of Lainie and Jess are distinctive, and both narrators are types. So why did you tell the story this way?
Well, again, based on my research, that the idea that women are typecast so early in our lives is really a common way, and we live it out our whole lives. And so Lainie was always a bit distant, as I said before, an outsider. And Jess works very hard. It's hard work to be the one. It's really hard work, and to be the one in town where everyone wants to be invited to Jess's table or Jess's lunch. And so I wanted that to be there throughout the story, because it really does rub against each other.
Was it easy to switch back and forth from, a Lainie section to a Jess section when you were writing?
It was for me, and I think that's because I saw them both so clearly. I could really see them even physically, the way that they are. They're so, that's the whole thing. They're so disparate in nature, yet they're both wives and mothers in the same town where the values are shared.
And when Charles announces that he can't commit to Jess, why does she believe that she can keep the affair going?
Ooh, we're giving away a lot of the book.
Okay.
Too much. Can't say.
Okay.
Have to read it.
I won't say anything else.
Okay.
So, do you think that this is a romance novel or a women's fiction?
Well, there's definitely, it's romantic and anti-romantic. But I do ask the question, what is romantic love, and what do we owe ourselves, and what is commitment? And, how do women get lost in mothering and wifing to the point where they forget what romantic love is? So it's not exactly a romance novel, but has some components of it, but it's definitely commercial women's fiction.
And have you had any men read the book and really get into it and give you feedback?
Oh, I like that question, yes. And as with men, in many cases, some are more enlightened than others. So I've heard back about Charles, the husband, and William, Jess's husband. Charles is Lainie's husband. And I've also heard that they really like the writing, and they like the theme of the sea. There's a lot of water themes. Going on through this book.
So you teach it at Marymount, and
I teach in the writing department.
And I
teach gender as my topic.
So can you tell us a little bit about that? It's very interesting.
I've been there for 18 years, and gender is fascinating because gender roles are prescribed. And I always say to my students at the beginning of the term, I say, let's ask ourselves what is within us, what is innate, and what is culturally driven. So nature and nurture in terms of how we behave as men and women.
And when you were working on Between the Tides, was it like a solitary venture? Did you did you join up with writers and workshops? Did you have any?
Well, yeah, and it actually has to do with gender and gender roles in a way, because I had been in a fiction writing workshop at the 92nd Street Y about 5 years ago, and at the end of the year, I asked the 3 writers whom I thought I could work well with if they wanted to start a very small writing group, and they're all men. And so when I workshopped Between the Tides, they were pretty supportive and enthused, but they all said, we don't really read this kind of book. So there you have the sort of full circle of gender, So I did workshop it, and I don't workshop nonfiction. Because for some reason, I think that fiction needs a few trustworthy people to really weigh in.
Another thing that I just thought of is like speaking events that you're doing, like tours and libraries and speaking events. How's it different with your nonfiction and then with fiction? How do you approach the audience?
Well, I'm definitely reading. No, with nonfiction, and I've done a lot of speaking gigs. You tend to talk about what you found, your findings, and what the conclusion would be. Whereas here, you can't give away the novel. You want to talk about the themes. So I'm really talking about the themes of the book. And then in one case, I read a bit from the pages.
And you talked a little bit about new stuff that you're working on. Can you revisit that and tell us just as much as you can about the process? How is it going? When is it going to be finished, do you think?
Well, I'm on a deadline, and I signed a contract, and it's a bit, compelling when you do that, when you make that kind of commitment. But I think for writers, and I've felt this all along with all my nonfiction too, that the idea is to write.
Exactly.
And I think that if we don't write, we're not really true to ourselves. So, to say, if I didn't write from 9 to 12, then I lost the day. I think to be an acrobat and to write however and whenever you can is a way to preserve the integrity of being a writer.
Some people are very regimented on a writing schedule.
Yeah, and I've always admired that. You read about famous writers, which is one of my favorite things. You read articles, and they say, oh, yes, every day I have it this way. But because I've taught so many years, and because I've raised a family, it hasn't always been that luxury. And I've written a lot at night. And you say no to things. Like, no, sorry, can't go to the mall. Sorry, can't go to lunch. Have to write my book. Not everyone gets it, but then there's the book.
Yeah, and so in terms of new things that you're doing, are you going somewhere after here today?
I am. I'm going to RJ Julia in Madison. I know. I can't wait to be there because I've never been there, and I'm really excited. I heard the town is beautiful, and then next week, and I was in Greenwich at a private party on Monday. That went really well. Yes. And then next week, I'll go to the Cape May Courthouse and speak there on Thursday night. I'm part of the Authors Night in East Hampton on Saturday nights, a week from this weekend. And then I go back to the Ocean County Library on Long Beach Island on that Monday.
Very busy. So if anyone is in any of those areas,
that would be really great. Yeah. And also, I wanted to say that I'd love to hear from readers. You can get in touch with me through the website.
Exactly. And I'm on social media.
Yeah, social media. Would love to, and I would do Skype for women's book groups or travel around to a group.
You guys reach out, please, and let her know. Now, in terms of you mentioned like favorite authors and reading about authors. Who are some of your favorites that inspire you?
Well, I love Jane Austen. Of course, I love William Styron. All the very serious writing book, Sophie's Choice. I love Chawla. I love to read commercial and literary present-day women writers. I think that reading other writers is exciting and thrilling, Yeah, so I would say I read a lot. I just read the new Kate Atkinson book, and I have The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna on my table to read next.
I love that,
Yeah, so I really admire other writers.
Any nonfiction in particular that you really enjoy?
For
Any
nonfiction,
topics,
yeah,
like, other than what you
I love to read about famous women. I seem to reread books about Anne Boleyn. I keep hoping maybe it didn't turn out to be so terrible.
I know.
She is, because she was so powerful.
Yeah.
And gave up her life for her daughter. So I always like to read about her. And I just read a book about Eleanor Roosevelt. Oh, in the whole Roosevelt, book after the
series.
Right
Did you
after
see
this.
that? Yeah,
I did, and I was really impressed
Yeah,
with
it's
her.
really great.
So, powerful women, very intriguing to me.
Now, I love the cover of the book. It's just serene, beautiful colors, and there's a woman's silhouette. Did you have any like input in the creation of that, or did they kind of?
This is the first time.
Really?
First time ever that they've sent a jacket, and I looked at it and said, "Oh yes, they really get it." Because other times there's not been a lot of tweaking.
Yeah.
But for Tripping the Prom Queen, if you know, there's that woman kicking the crown with the stiletto, and I remember we did a little back and forth about that. And Toxic Friends was perfect. It was like a toxic green, hot pink on the back. So St. Martin's has done, Envy, right? But they've done an amazing job with the jackets. But this jacket, I just couldn't believe how much it represented this story. Just the broken water and the woman looking out to sea.
Now, in terms of like new kind of trends that you see in gender studies and women's topics, do you see anything like really coming out that is different that you would love to kind of pursue?
Well, I think it's really interesting that perhaps it's changing now, but in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a misunderstanding of what feminism really means by young women, and I say to anyone that we all sit where we do because of the second wave of feminism in the 60s. And I think that there are certain ways of living that still persist, like young women, like particular millennials, I've noticed in my research, because I've written a few books on the role of wife, and they will talk about wanting to be almost more like their grandmothers than their mothers. Yeah. So they would like to have husbands who earn a lot of money, and they have these hard-earned college and graduate degrees, but aren't convinced that they'll use them and forge a career. Right. And I think that's concerning. I think that they have to understand that men come and go, and that we live in a capitalistic society where you really need to earn money. Absolutely. So that trend is kind of stuck. I uncovered it maybe 8 or 10 years ago, and I'm still seeing that, unfortunately.
Now, there's a lot about marriage in between the tides, which I think is very interesting, and millennials are getting married like later and later in life. Do you have any input on that? And just
in between the tides, I really look at the role of wife and why it is so all-encompassing in the town of Elliot, and why the working wives / mothers are divided by those who have careers and those who don't. Yeah. And that's another ongoing trend or situation that we don't see much improvement by. So, the role of wife has long fascinated me. Because do you lose yourself when you take on the greater good, which would be husbands and houses and children? Or do you sustain yourself? And I think that's really a part of the story.
And they moved from New York to suburbia, which is very interesting, and just kind of the weird things about suburbia, this strange new reality. So,
well, Lainie really loves the diversity of New York, and she loves the waterways. Because remember, her art is on a water theme. Exactly. So she loves the Hudson River, she loves the East River, she loves the Gowanus Canal and Red Hook, and she just looks to it for the beauty and the solace in a city, which is a way to have a very rich life. When she moves to landlocked Elliot, she's really taken away from her turf, and that's very, very hard for her. Some of us might adjust better than
The
Lainie.
silky is plucked from the sea,
Exactly.
literally. Yeah. Now, we've come to the end of our questions, but I just want to thank you again for joining
Thank you
us.
for having me.
And we are giving away a copy of the book. We'd love to have you sign it because you're here with
I
us
would
in
love
BookTrib.
to. Okay.
So, once again, just thank you so much for joining us. And Between the Tides, Susannah Marren, also known as Susan Shapiro-Barish.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, guys.